Hello, my name is Daryl,
And my name is Greg.
and today this is Inside the Mastermind. And today we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Rich Decker, the owner of Mindful Accord. And so I don't butcher it. Maybe you could just tell me a little bit more of Rich. Maybe you can come on and tell us a little bit more about Mindful Accord, what you do, and we'll kind of go into asking you questions a little bit more about mindful core meditation, that type of thing. So go ahead, Rich.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here, and I've watched your show before, and I enjoy it. And so, my business, Daryl and we've known each other. What has it been a couple years now? Yeah. So, my business is when I first started, I was with the idea of going to businesses that are looking to embrace mindfulness, meditation, those type of practices. But I've changed direction recently, and I'm going to go to more of an online presence, create online courses, and create actually an online school. It'll be called the Masters of the Mind Institute. And digging a little deeper into the idea of how this thing in our head works. And it's kind of a combination of psychology, philosophy, and some stuff in between with science. And it's not necessarily people like angel type of stuff, but it's more science-based, philosophy-based, but examining the nature of our mind and really kind of the nature of reality. So that's what I've been working on recently. It's just a fascination I've had. I've always wondered, like, why, like the big question that we all ask is, who am I? What am I doing here? What's the purpose of this? Is there any purpose to it? It's that age old question. So it just helps me understand a little bit better. So that's where I'm at with Mindful Accord. When that will be up, I don't have a definite time frame yet. Within the next 6 months, I'll have that all up.
And real quick, um, Rich, maybe you could just talk a little bit about what got you into mindfulness, meditation, that type of thing, like kind of what inspired you, and kind of go into that a little bit more.
Well, I spent decades in a very dark place. Um, Depression was a common feeling for me. I dealt with my depression and anxiety going all the way back from the time I was very young. And I dealt with that by self-medicating myself heavily, heavily self-medicating myself. And that brings along its own problems. So you add in the self-medication, depression, and anxiety, it brings you trouble, just a lot of trouble. So I had decades of problems, trouble of my own creation. Well, when I finally had a moment, I guess they call it in the 12 steps or whatever, a moment of clarity, and I could see things differently for the first time. My brain was still a scrambled mess after years of abuse, not just the self medication, but just the thinking. My thinking was not good. It wasn't helpful for me or anybody around me, honestly. So when I did that, I needed to quiet my mind. And so a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Jackson Saunders, he turned me on to meditation. I had thought of it. I wanted to try it before, but even when I was a teenager, I was raised Catholic. So my priest, Father Gabriel, who was a fine man, but he literally said this to me. I asked him about transcendental meditation. He said, "Oh, don't do that. The devil will get you." Basically, that's what he said, right? The devil will get you. So that's the kind of thinking that I thought. So I was kind of afraid of it. But I was, when I finally got myself straightened out a little bit, I was so desperate to quiet this thing, this rattling, this constant chattering that was making me crazy, that I would try anything. So I started doing it, and I noticed some changes pretty quickly. Pretty quickly, I noticed some changes within probably a few weeks, actually. And I just started becoming a calmer person. And I was able to just be more aware of myself and my surroundings. And I just started feeling better. I just started feeling better. And little things that used to bother me didn't bother me so much. I didn't lose my temper, and I didn't have the anxiety and depression like I used to have. So what I did with this meditation and these other practices is I physically changed parts of my brain. And I keep doing it because I have to, otherwise my brain will go back. So I just started feeling better. And then when I did that, I'm like, I had such a transformation in my life. I want to help other people who may be in the situation I am, or maybe not even, but just living this normal life and dealing with stress and anxiety and worries and all these things that we get so worried about. Just to be able to deal with it in a better manner and just enjoy life a little more instead of, life, I think, is meant to be enjoyed, not just endured. So you can have some happiness and some contentment in life. That was my change, that was my hero's journey.
Very cool. And you also have a podcast. We could talk about that maybe towards the end, kind of the other things that you're doing and kind of how people can get a hold of you. But I think you might have mentioned earlier off screen that reality is kind of a place of study right now, and just the study of understanding the current reality that people are living in, and the reality that sits in the mind, the reality externally. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I've been interested in that for a while. So, when you begin to study things like quantum physics and quantum mechanics, it's almost like magic, right? But I just had this interest in, again, this goes back to, who am I? What am I doing here? What is all this? Does this have any meaning? Is there any, why? Just who am I? Questions. I don't have any answers. I just have a lot of questions. So what are the questions about that? So what is this reality that we live in? And if you look at it, if you presented the argument like, okay, I want you to prove that we don't live in a holographic world, you really can't, because you look at nature and you look at science and the combination in maths and everything. So I've always, this idea that we're living in some kind of holographic world or a multiverse or something has always just been fascinating. As a kid, I love sci-fi, Japanese monster movies, stuff like that. So I'm still that kid in many ways. But I recently came across a gentleman, Donald D. His name is escaping me. I'll think of it here in a second. But anyway, so I listened to a podcast of his, not his pod. He was on a guest on a podcast.
Possibly Donald Hoffman.
Thank you, Donald Hoffman. Donald Hoffman. He's a professor, I believe, at not UC Davis, but University of California. He's been there for many years, but he's been interested in this idea of the nature of reality for many years, decades, really. And his theory is that the world we interact with, you can think of it like as a desktop. So, you see, for example, I have my phone here, right? So this looks like a phone, but really what this is an icon. This is not an accurate representation of what exactly this is. It's like a desktop icon. And so what this thing is really is much deeper. And he used a great example. So you say you put your hand in hot water or warm water, right? So you feel a sensation of warm water. And it's just very simple. Okay, it's warm water. But what's going on chemically within that water and all the interactions that are going on are very deep. So his theory is that species that see reality as it is don't survive or haven't survived throughout evolution. That's why, because we don't see reality as it is. And he does mathematical things to prove this. But so that seems reasonable to me. But what is interesting, the most interesting aspect of Dr. Hoffman's theory is that, there's the hard question of consciousness in science that science has no answer for. How does consciousness come from matter? How do these electrical things going on in my brain, these exchange of proteins and what have you, the exchange between the synapses in my brain, how does that make me? So science has no answer for that. Well, he says we're probably asking the wrong question. How does consciousness come from matter? What the question is, how does matter come from consciousness? So consciousness in his theory is the fundamental aspect of it. So just as an example, so he said prior to when there were human beings or human-like creatures, probably the world was here, things were here, but they appeared much different than what they appear to us. So that's a very Buddhist philosophy, actually. The higher schools of Buddhism teach you that us collectively create this world. So what he's trying to do, though, he's trying to take that idea, but he's trying to prove it scientifically through math and through scientific experiments. So that's what I've been fascinated with lately. I don't know, it's almost become an obsession for me in many ways. But, that's kind of at the higher schools. But, I still have to remember I have to work on the little stuff, right? I got to keep, get up, do my morning meditation, do my morning routine every day, and do the things throughout the day to keep my brain intact. But I've just been fascinated. I don't know what your guys' thoughts on that are. If you think we live in some kind of matrix of some kind, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Greg,
it's funny
Greg,
that
you want to go ahead and handle that?
Oh yeah, it's funny. I was literally already just thinking of like a response. So just first off, I want to say congratulations, Rich, for because a couple things you said actually hit me. Like the initial part was you said you were in a dark place for many years, and instead of letting that fully consume you, you fought against that and learned how to, change that into a positive. And then now, because if I, just by looking at you now and hearing you, I would never have thought that you seem so happy and like bright. I could just feel your, or it feels like it's just so much positive energy. So congrats to that. Another part, what you said that got me was, because this is something I say too. Actually, I had an interview Friday with a colleague of mine, and one of the things that she actually said is that a lot of people do not ask themselves enough questions nowadays. They just want kind of other people to think for them, or they just want an answer. But if you sit down and ask yourself questions, you may not have the answers right away, but just by doing it definitely will open your mind up to some other possibilities. So I've started actually to learn to do that myself, just ask myself more questions about just various different topics and things, and then see if answers come to me or if I'm guided to the right direction that I'm looking for. Another thing you said that actually I actually truly believe in, and I say this to people all the time. I say, because I didn't say I'm a big kid, where everything I loved as a kid, like, I love Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and you see some Japanese animations, a lot of different things like that. And I believe that if you, even as an adult, you still have to have a balance of your kid self and adult self, because I think if you're too overbalanced in one area, it's just not good. Whether if you're too much of a big kid and, you don't ask yourself questions or try to help other people out, you just enter this I don't know, reality to where it just doesn't really do good for you. Or if you're too much of an adult, you're too serious, you're too cocky, you take everything too seriously, you don't learn to laugh. But when you have that balance, hey, I can still go watch a cartoon at the theater by myself and be okay with it, and then also just have my other side. So I do believe that if you have because I have that balance. I still love everything as a kid. And the last thing, as far as the Matrix, that's something that I tell Daryl, all the time. I really do believe that we are taught as a society to live in the Matrix. Because our paradigm is just a multitude of habits that gets programmed to us as kids, and then we go through school. They program us more, like you said, because I went to a Catholic school myself, and you're taught to like fear the devil and that like limits yourself to, if you want to try meditation and do other things, you're like, oh wait, no, I'm gonna go to hell or this, but. In reality, it's actually limiting yourself. Because actually, I'm not sure if you guys ever read the book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. That's a really powerful book, because it's supposedly in that book, he actually interviewed the devil, and it's more of a question and answer type style book. And it's just very interesting because I feel like he actually was talking to someone. If you guys don't know who Napoleon Hill is, he's the guy who wrote the most famous book, Think and Grow Rich, where he interviewed 500 of the most successful people during his time, like in the 1920s and 30s. And he wrote a book on philosophy as far as like becoming rich or wealthy and just living a life of abundance. So there's like 17 principles that he got from these interviews. So then he actually wrote another book that actually didn't get published until, I believe, 2011. So 70 years later, because it just wasn't ready to come out. His family didn't want him to publish it. And it took until now for that book to actually get published after his death. But it's a very interesting read. I highly recommend reading Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. But yeah, I do believe we are living in like a matrix, or like, I have a blog post called Do Our Dreams Equal to Multiverse? Because I feel that if you have a dream and it's like yourself, but you're in another house, or you're with a bunch of friends you've never seen before, that you're actually peeking through the multiverse, or you're somehow connected with it in your dreams, your other self in that other parallel universe. That's why it's like, wow, I was like at home, but I'd never seen this house before. This is really crazy. I do believe that is like some type of multiversal vision that you're getting while you sleep. But I believe like once you learn to change your paradigm, you connect with the right type of people, you read books and just, start to ask yourself more questions and study, you will change that paradigm. You start to unplug yourself from that matrix and you see the world as it really is. Then, you help other people unplug from the matrix. So that's kind of my take on a few different areas that you said, I didn't want to take up too much time, but try to touch on each one of those.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say ditto that. I think there's the possibility. I think even Elon Musk is on record as saying like, hey, we're probably living in just kind of a simulation at this point. So I don't know. Like, I guess if you're living in a simulation, if we're living in a kind of a video game type of life, like a question I could revert back to you, Rich, is just what can people do to kind of gain more control over this simulation, or gain more control with meditation even over their life and their focus? Do you have any suggestions?
Well, so before we get into that, let's talk about what I think meditation is. So there's this thing going on in your heads. Anyone that's watching this right now, all three of us have this chattering going on right now. And so that's going on all the time, right? There's probably, I've heard different figures, but there's at least tens of thousands of thoughts that we have every day. And those thoughts influence you. Most of it's unconsciously. And it affects your emotions, and it affects your body, and it affects your mood, whatever. So if you want to try and get control of that and be the master of that, instead of having your mind be the master of you, you need to observe it. You need to observe what's going on. That's what meditation is. You're just sitting there and you're watching your thoughts. At least starting out with. There's different forms of meditation, but you're watching your thoughts. And what you quickly discover when you start doing this every day is that, number one, there's a madman living in my head, right? My thoughts are everywhere. They go from the past to the future in a second. I'm a very judgmental person. In fact, I did a 10-day Vipassana course back in December. It's SN Goenka. And so you sit in silence for 10 days. There's no talking. You meditate for 10 hours a day. No talking, no gesturing, nothing. I mean, nothing. So what I discovered is I'm an extremely judgmental person. I was judging people that I had never even met before, that I hadn't said a word to, and I had all these judgments about them. So that's always going on. But if I wasn't quiet and I just sat and I watched my thoughts, I wouldn't realize that. I would be caught up in all that chattering. And so, some people have probably heard the term, I think Eckhart Tolle made it famous recently, is that, I am not my thoughts. Most people are like, what the hell does that mean, right? Well, you're not your thoughts. And what you find out is your thoughts kind of think themselves, right? It just kind of comes from out of nowhere. So until you stop and watch that and realize that what you're doing, mainly, and most of that chatter, probably 80% of it is not helpful to you or anybody else because it's negative. And I think this goes back to our brains are not wired to be happy. They're wired to survive above all else. We evolved and we survived because of that. And the humans now dominate and rule the world, right? People may think whatever religious beliefs you have, fine, whatever. But we are wired to survive first and foremost. Our brains are geared towards threats, and it's constantly looking for threats. Because as species among other species on the planet, we're not that strong. Well, let's just compare ourselves to other primates, right? We're not very strong. Chimpanzees, even though they're smaller than us, are 5 times our strength. We don't have very good teeth for attacking. We're not particularly, and we're on two legs, which is a big disadvantage. So what made us different? This, right? This. And the fact that we could create stories and imagine a future. But through those, pardon me, through those millions of years for us to get to where we are now and our early ancestors, we had to survive. So our ancestors that survived, you know, that's the part that got traded down. So in the modern world we live in, there aren't a lot of tigers looking to eat us anymore. There aren't a lot of threats. There is really not many enemies. I would say there's no enemies. The only enemy is you. But that part of our brain's always looking for enemies. So we create them, right? And most of it, the time we're doing it unconsciously. It's always looking for a threat. I think that's why, you know, if you look at human history, what's the major dominating factor of human history? War, right? War. Back when we lived in tribes, I was just reading a book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And he was talking about in the book, it was either that or Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus. I can't remember which one, but so like the islands of Hawaii, right? Back, you know, 500 years ago, those tribes on those islands were constantly fighting with each other, right? Constantly going to war with each other. That's our history because we're always looking for threats. If you meet a stranger, your first thought is, oh, I better be careful, right? Because it's all those millions of years of evolution. But so when you start to realize that, you can change it a little bit. You can change it. And then what you find is when you change here and inside you and you get calmer, the outside world changes because the outside world is a projection of what's in here, right? This is a projection. And then if you get into the idea of what Hoffman's talking about, that this world outside us is more like an icon, then perhaps if we really get good at controlling this, maybe we can change this, right? Like kind of like in the Matrix, right? How you can manipulate this. And I say there's proof of that because, you know, just 1,000 years ago, look at where we were and look at where we are now, right? How did all that happen? Because we changed this. That what we have now, these devices we're talking through, they could have existed 1,000 years ago, but they didn't. Why? Because we couldn't imagine them. So there's another great book. And Greg, I'm glad you mentioned Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. That is a fantastic book. And I forgot about it until you just mentioned it. So I'm going to go reread that. That's a great book. And I think his family, his wife or something, didn't want it published, right? I think that's what it was. And yeah. And so it's a great book. And it's a great book. But there's another great book. It's called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. I recommend this book to everybody. But he talks about what we're talking about here is you know, how is it that we came to dominate the planet? There was actually 6 different species of humans at one time. And some of us lived together on the planet at the same time. Mainly the one I think of first off is Neanderthals. Most people are familiar with Neanderthals from movies or stories or whatever. But we coexisted on the planet at one time. I think it was 50,000 years ago that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens existed on the planet at the same time. But why is it that we have come to dominate the planet? And we were the ones of 6 species of humans that lived, that survived. Well, his theory is that about 70,000 years ago, there was a major genetic mutation in our brains, and we were able to start creating fiction. We could start telling stories. We could envision a future. And we could envision a future where we had cars and laptops and cameras and all this stuff. Maybe not then, but the builds. So I honestly believe that, you know, imagine where we'll be, just say in 100 years. The people in 100 years will look back on us as kind of primitive. Don't you think? We'll be looked upon as like, God, those guys were just so backwards, right? Just imagine that. And we think we're so advanced now. But why will that be? Because our thinking and this idea of humans and computers intermingling and coming closer together, and algorithms kind of taking over. You know, dataism is the new religion. Dataism has kind of become God. Algorithms are the new priests. Imagine what the world will be like in 100 years. So, you know, I kind of got off the topic there about, you know, how do you get control of your mind, but this all starts with getting control of this thing in your head and realizing that there's all this stuff going on all the time, and that you're not your thoughts, and you don't have to be so emotionally attached to your thoughts because they change so quickly and they're probably not helping you.
Right. Well, yeah, I think we could go on and on. I cannot even imagine. I'm not sure if I agree, but I cannot even imagine what 100 years from now, because I think there's what's coming is the singularity, which we could go into on another episode or so. And like what's coming is just the meshing of like either the destruction of like humankind, or possibly the meshing, more likely the meshing of, you know, computers and humankind. Actually, I don't know how many people who can live without this thing for more than like 5 days at a time anymore. It's kind of sad, but we'll probably need to start wrapping up here a little bit. But do want to maybe ask this. Usually we try and give the audience some homework and stuff. If somebody is trying to get more into a mindful practice, or like calming this little noodle that is in between the skull here, like, are there any tips that you have, or like anything, suggestions on things to read or practices to take in order to kind of get this calmed down a little bit?
What I would do is I would start just each morning. Don't start big. Just take 5 minutes each morning after you get up. Get a little movement. It's good to get the body flowing. Get a little movement. You know, do a little jumping or whatever. Get a little movement going. But then take some time and just sit still. And you can do something as simple as following your breath, and just do that for 5 minutes. But do it every day. And then what you'll begin to notice is, like I mentioned before, is you'll begin to see this crazy person that's living in my head. It's not helping me much, but you'll start seeing some changes a little bit. That's what I would recommend. Start very simple. You don't have to worry about getting in, like sitting in a certain posture or whatever. Just be comfortable. Whatever is comfortable for you. You know, you don't want to fall asleep, but you want to be comfortable. And you could just follow your breath or follow a word. If you want to, there's a great app that's a free app. It's available on iPhones and Androids. It's called Insight Timer. I've been using that for, I don't know, 4 years now. And you can time yourself, and there's literally thousands of guided meditations on Insight Timer. So that's very helpful. It keeps track of your progress. I wouldn't say, I want to use the word progress. It just keeps track, right? So you can see where you were to where you are now. I guess that's progress. What's a book that I would recommend? Okay, so there's a book. It's not necessarily about meditation, but it's probably been one of the most influential books as an adult in my life. And that's The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David Schwartz. That book, I got that book from Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. He mentions it at the end. It's one of his favorite books. That book had a huge impact in my life, huge impact on my life. But it ties in with the mindfulness, because what the magic of thinking big is, if you want to change your life, you got to change your thinking.
Awesome. And yeah, with that, I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap up. But Rich, I know you have a podcast out there. Maybe you can share a little bit more about your podcast, and then also if you could share like how people can get a hold of you, and kind of go forward from there. And then me and Greg might have some final words after that. So
certainly. So I've been doing a podcast. I started in December. It's called The Hero's Journey, a Mindful Core podcast. Along with the nature of reality, I'm also fascinated by the hero's journey story. If you don't know the hero's journey story, you probably are living it right now. You just don't realize it. Or if you don't know what that is, think of Star Wars. Luke Skywalker's the hero's journey. Harry Potter's the hero's journey. Homer, the Iliad. Every culture throughout human history has a hero's journey story. Read the Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, who was the foremost expert on mythology. But I'm fascinated by that story. I lived it. A lot of people live it. And you don't have to be famous or a celebrity to live that story, right? Or whatever. So I just interview people who've gone through that, who started here, a lot of troubles and challenges, and they came out on the other end, and we just talk about their journey. You can find it on iTunes, on any podcast app. And if you want to find out more information about myself, what I'm doing, I do a bi-weekly blog. I release the podcast bi-weekly. You can go to mindfulaccord.com. And I want to thank you both for your time. This is cool. I could talk about this stuff for hours.
No problem. Thank you for being with us today, Rich. I really appreciate it. And I'll just go ahead and throw this out. If in addition to Rich and the resources that we'll go ahead and add in the description here once we got everything edited up, just want to throw out, like, if you're looking for additional insight, inspiration, that type of thing, definitely check out Greg's website, planetgreenzen.com. It's got a blog that kind of goes over a lot of great topics, and also has some products there that might be helpful as well. So just want to throw that out.
Thanks, Daryl. Sorry, I was on mute. But yeah, so if you guys want to actually join a mastermind group such as this one, Daryl is accepting applications. His link will be in the description below. Go ahead and click on that link, fill out your application, and Daryl will let you know what to expect, or just so if you want to join this mastermind group, connect with Daryl. He'll give you the rundown on that, so we can possibly have you also here on this mastermind. And one last thing I would like to add is it's actually sort of a quote or paraphrase from Mel Robbins. She is actually, I don't know exactly what she does. I don't know if she's a philosopher or she I think she wrote a couple of books. But the thing that I liked for what she said is that you have 5 seconds in the morning when you first wake up before your brain starts to sabotage you, because of we're all again, we have that defensive mechanism and that survival, from the evolution of thousands to millions of years ago, to where she said if you wake up and you want to do something, you have to do it right away. She said she uses the NAS to count down at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off, and gets her out of bed and going, because if you wait after that, your brain will sabotage you and you will not do what you plan out to accomplish in life.
Awesome. And with that, that's pretty much been Inside the Mastermind. Thank you again, Rich, so much for joining us this week. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and subscribe, tell friends, that type of thing. If you did not enjoy it, please go ahead and reach back out to us directly and let us know how we can improve. And with that, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.